The train doors were closing when Anita threw herself through them. She landed hard on her palms against the carriage floor, her carry-on bag skidding across the aisle. The Seoul Metro Line 2 last service, 11:47 p.m. lurched forward, pulling away from Sindaram Station. She scrambled upright, chest heaving, and pressed her back against the nearest pole. Her left eye was swollen half shut. She hadn't looked in a mirror in 3 days, but she could feel it, the pulpy heat beneath the skin, the way blinking sent a white spark of pain behind her eye socket. The bruise on her collarbone was older, fading from purple to a sick yellow-green. The new cut along her jawline, courtesy of a Mecca's ring, had stopped bleeding but hadn't closed properly. She was still wearing the dress from the dinner she had not been allowed to finish. The carriage was nearly empty. 3 seats down, a drunk salaryman slept with his mouth open. Near the far doors, a teenage girl stared into her phone, earbuds in, completely sealed in her own world. Anita exhaled slowly. Good, no one paying attention. She found a seat, pulled her bag onto her lap, and pressed her forehead to the cold window glass. Outside, Seoul moved in rivers of light. She had exactly 94,001 in cash, a Nigerian passport she had retrieved from behind the bathroom tiles 2 weeks ago, the day she had started planning, and a one-way bus ticket to Incheon departing at 6:15 a.m. After that, a flight. After that, her cousin's apartment in London. After that, she had not allowed herself to think. One step, then the next. If you have ever had to choose between the devil you know and the stranger who scares you less, this story is for you. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay with me. Every second of this matters. She had been a Mecca Adami's wife for 4 years. In the first year, she had loved him. In the second year, she had started to understand what she had married. By the 3rd year, she had stopped calling her mother, because her mother would hear the truth in her voice, and Anita could not bear her mother's helplessness from 3,000 miles away. She was done. She pressed her fingers to the cut on her jaw, winced, dropped her hand. The train doors opened at Dharam Station. No one got on then. At Sindang, 2 men in dark coats entered the carriage from opposite ends simultaneously. Something in the precision of their movement, the way they didn't look at each other but clearly knew exactly where the other one was, made Anita go very still. Between them, unhurried, came a 3rd man. He was tall for a Korean man. Broad through the shoulders in a way that his suit, charcoal gray, immaculately cut, did not bother to conceal. He was younger than she'd expected from the way the 2 men flanked him, perhaps mid-30s, with a jawline that could have been carved from stone and dark eyes that moved across the carriage in exactly the way a person's eyes move when they are cataloging threats, not scenery. He sat down directly across from Anita, not beside her. Across. 4 feet of space and a metal floor between them, and somehow it felt like no distance at all. His eyes landed on her face. She looked away first. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The train rocked gently through the tunnel. The salaryman 3 seats down muttered something in his sleep and was silent again. "You are bleeding," the man said. His English was clean, barely accented, the kind that came from years abroad rather than a classroom. Anita did not look at him. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine." She turned then, because there was something in his tone, not unkind, but completely unwilling to be dismissed, that made ignoring him feel like the more dangerous option. Up close, his eyes were darker than she'd first registered. Not warm, but not cold either. Something more unsettling, attentive. He was looking at her jaw, her eye, the way her knuckles were white around the strap of her bag. He was reading her the way a person reads a document they already know the contents of. "It's not your concern," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. She flinched, a full involuntary backward press into her seat before she could stop herself. His hand stilled instantly. He waited 1 beat, then withdrew a small folded packet of tissues which he placed on the seat beside him and slid across toward her without invading her space. "For the jaw," he said simply. She stared at the tissues. Her throat moved. "Thank you," she said quietly and took them. She pressed one to her jaw and the sting made her eyes water. She refused to let anything fall. She had not cried since Tuesday. She did not intend to start on a train in front of a stranger. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Incheon. Tonight. In the morning. I just needed." She stopped herself. Why was she explaining anything to this man? "I just needed to be moving." He seemed to understand that in a way that required no further explanation. He leaned back in his seat, loosened his collar button with 2 fingers and looked out the window. "My name is Ryu," he said to the glass. "Ryu Seok." The teenage girl near the far doors looked up from her phone at the name. She looked back down immediately, very carefully. The way people looked away from things they'd been trained not to see, Anita noticed. Her stomach did something slow and cold. "Anita," she said, because it seemed worse, suddenly, not to answer. The train slowed into Wangsimni Station. The two men in dark coats did not move. Neither did Ryu Seok. He sat in complete ease, the stillness of someone who had never once in their adult life needed to make themselves small for any room they entered. Anita gripped her bag strap and told herself she was not afraid. She was not doing a convincing job of it. The train moved through Seongsu, then Konkuk University Station, and Anita told herself to stop talking. She was not doing a good job of that either. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was 4 years of swallowing every word before it left her mouth, and now that she was finally moving, finally breathing her own air for the first time, something in her could not stay sealed. Or maybe it was the strange quality of stillness this man carried, the way he didn't push, didn't press, didn't perform interest, that made speaking feel safe in a way she couldn't rationally explain. "For years," she said, to the window more than to him, "I kept thinking it would change. That I was misreading something, that maybe I was the problem." She pressed the tissue a little harder against her jaw. "It took me a long time to understand that the hope itself was what he was using." Ryu Seok said nothing. He was watching her in that same attentive way, not filling her pauses with comfort or noise, just present, just listening with his whole body in the way that very few people knew how to do. "Long have you been in Seoul?" he asked. When she had been quiet long enough that it was a genuine question rather than an interruption. 3 years. He brought me here for his business." She almost laughed, almost. "I thought it was romantic, a new city, a fresh start." She folded the tissue over. "It was just further from everyone who would notice." Ryu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. If she hadn't been looking directly at him, she would have missed it. "Where is he now?" "Our apartment, probably asleep." She checked the time. No messages. "I left while he was in the shower. I have been practicing that exit for 6 weeks." Ryu studied her with an expression she couldn't fully name. It wasn't pity, she would have shut down completely at pity. It was something harder and more serious than that. Closer to the way a man looks at a fire he is calculating the full size of. "He will look for you," Ryu said. "I know. When he discovers you are gone." "I know." Her voice didn't waver. She was proud of that. "That's why I'm on a train at midnight instead of sitting still somewhere waiting for morning." A pause. The city outside shifted from dense commercial towers to quieter, wider residential streets. They were deep into the eastern line now. "Anita." His voice was different when he said her name this time, more direct. "Do you know who I am?" She looked at him carefully. The two men in coats who had not relaxed once since they boarded. The teenage girl who had looked away so fast she'd nearly dropped her phone. The precise, geometric calm he carried without any visible effort. "No," she said, "but I think I should." Something moved in his expression, the ghost of something that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. "My family controls the eastern supply chains across 5 districts of Seoul. Imports, exports, and everything in between that does not pass through customs." He said it without affect, the way a person states their occupation when they are neither ashamed nor proud of it, simply factual. "The organization is called Chunjia. In certain circles, the name alone is enough." Anita's hands went still on her bag. Chunjia. Even inside the fragile, carefully constructed isolation of her marriage, she had heard that name. Emeka's business associates whispered it. A Korean man at one of his dinners had gone visibly pale when someone said it too loudly near an open window. She had never asked why. She had learned not to ask about things that made men go pale. Yes," he said simply. The carriage rocked. She became acutely aware of how empty it was, of how far they were from any platform. Of the two men at the ends of the carriage who had not moved or blinked since Sindang. "Then why are you talking to me?" Her voice stayed very steady. She was grateful for that. "Because you are bleeding on my train," he said. "And whoever put that cut on your face made a decision tonight that I find interesting." "I'm not your concern," she said again, but this time it came out differently. Less certain. Like a sentence she'd already started to disbelieve. "You said that already," he said. "It didn't work the first time either. Mr. Ryu Seok, appreciate the tissues." She straightened her spine. Every instinct she had sharpened across 4 years of surviving Emeka was firing at once. "Read the room, don't show fear, stay calm, locate the exit. But I don't need anything else from you. I have a plan, I just need to get to Incheon." If he goes to Incheon, the question landed like a stone into still, dark water. He won't know where I am, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, her hand moved toward her phone and she stopped, stared at it, turned it over, the phone Emeka had given her on his account. His carrier, his network. Her face changed before she could stop it, and Ryu Seok watched it change with those dark, patient eyes like a man who had already been 3 steps ahead and was simply waiting for her to arrive. "Give it to me," he said quietly. "What?" "The phone. Give it to me." She held it for one more second, one last moment of it being hers, even though it never was, then placed it across the gap between them. He took it, turned it over once, and without ceremony, dropped it through the narrow gap between the train door and the carriage wall. She heard the small, distant sound of it striking the track below. For a moment, she felt absolutely nothing. Then something enormous and complicated moved through her chest, and she pressed her lips together very hard. "He can still flag the passport," she said, voice controlled. "He won't." Certainty in his voice was not a boast. It was a decision he had already made on behalf of reality. "You don't know Emeka," she said. "He doesn't stop. He's very patient and he is very—" "Anita." Ryu Seok leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, voice dropping into something that was almost gentle. "I am the person that men like your husband are patient about." Carriage was silent except for the rhythm of the tracks underneath them. She believed him. That was what frightened her and steadied her in the same breath. They were pulling into Jamsil when his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds, then stood. "Change of plan," he said. Not to her, to the air, which was enough, because both men at the ends of the carriage were already in motion. Anita was on her feet before she made a conscious decision to stand. "What's happening?" Ryu slid his phone into his pocket. His face had shifted, not to panic, nothing that uncultivated, but to a sharper, flatter version of itself. The part of him that calculated. "Your husband reported you to the building security company. They have a GPS record from this phone." He glanced toward the gap in the train door, "which is now on the track somewhere behind Seongsu. That buys time, not enough." "Us." She had filed the word away earlier and now it surfaced again. "He has someone watching the Incheon terminals," Ryu continued. His communication with the security company was specific enough that this was not a man making a domestic call out of concern. He has arrangements already in place, which means your husband is not simply a violent man, Anita. He is a connected violent man. Cold moved through her slowly. "He has business with people. He never told me who." "Doesn't need to." Ryu looked at her directly. "You are not getting on a bus to Incheon tonight. I have a flight, which he will flag within the hour." He moved toward the door as the train began to slow for the platform. "Come with me." "Don't." She stood in the aisle, bag in both hands, every survival instinct warring violently with itself. Walk off this train with a Mafia boss she had met 40 minutes ago, or walk into a terminal where Emeka's people were already positioned. "I don't know you," Ryu said. "But you know exactly what is waiting if you don't." Doors slid open. She followed him. Outside Jamsil Station, 2 black vehicles were already at the exit, engines running. She didn't ask how. One of his men opened a rear door without being told. Ryu gestured for her to get in, and she did, because the alternative was standing on a Seoul street at midnight with a swollen eye and no phone and no warning system. And she had not survived 4 years of Emeka to be careless with the last few hours of her escape. The car moved before her door had fully closed. She sat rigid in the leather seat, bag pulled onto her lap, hands folded carefully on top of it. Ryu was beside her, already on a call she couldn't follow, low, rapid Korean, clipped and precise. She caught the name Chinjia once. Whatever came back through the phone made the line of his jaw tight, and he ended the call. "There is a safe house in Mapo," he said. "You will stay there tonight. Tomorrow we deal with the flight." She turned to face him fully. "I am not your problem to manage, Ryu Seok. I am a woman who sat next to you on a train for 20 minutes. You are a woman who is in danger." His voice didn't rise. "And right now I am the most efficient solution to that danger available to you. You can be offended by that truth, or you can be practical about it. I would strongly suggest practical." "Don't take well to being organized by men I didn't ask for help from," she said, and her voice had an edge to it that surprised even her. 4 years of being managed, controlled, reduced. Something in her would not soften that sentence even for a man who had, by any reasonable measure, just saved her from a very bad night. "Not managing you." He held her gaze without flinching. "I'm offering you a room with a door that locks from the inside. You can leave whenever you choose. I don't keep people against their will." A pause, something shifting just slightly beneath the composed surface of him. That is not something I do. The silence between them was different from the silence on the train. Heavier, more specific. One night, she said finally. He nodded once and looked forward. The safe house was in a quiet residential block, 6th floor. The kind of building that looked utterly ordinary from the street and was anything but once the elevator doors opened. Clean, warm, stocked. A woman was already there when they arrived, mid-50s, who bowed briefly to Ryu and then looked at Anita's face with the practiced, unhurried eye of someone who had seen injuries before and understood how to treat them without making it an event. Her name was Mrs. O. She sat Anita at a kitchen table and cleaned the cut on her jaw with a steadiness that Anita found almost unbearable in its simple kindness. It had been a very long time since anyone had touched her face gently. "Does it need stitches?" Anita asked. "No, it will scar faintly if it is not kept dressed properly." Mrs. O's English was careful, considered. "Men who use their rings understand this. The mark stays longer that way." Her voice carried no heat, just fact. Like she was reading from a document she had read many times before, Anita said nothing. From the next room she could hear Ryu's voice, low and continuous on another call. She couldn't make out words, but she could read the tone, controlled, precise, occasionally dropping into something quieter that sounded, improbably, like restraint. Like a man holding something carefully back that very much wanted to move forward. Mrs. O set a cup of tea on the table. "He doesn't bring people here," she said, without being asked, in the way that people sometimes say the most important thing as though it is simply an observation about the weather. Anita looked up. "In 8 years," Mrs. O said, "he has never brought someone to this apartment. Not once." She poured her own cup without hurry. "I say this not to place a weight on you. I say it only so you understand that whatever he is doing tonight, he is not doing it from habit or procedure." Before Anita could respond, Ryu appeared in the kitchen doorway. His jacket was off. His sleeves were folded to the elbow. There was a tightness across his shoulders that hadn't been visible on the train, the kind of tension that lives in a person when they are managing something they are not fully saying aloud. "He's here," Ryu said. "Who?" But she already knew. Her body knew before the word reached her ears. The cup trembled very slightly in her hands. She pressed it flat to the table. "He tracked the last GPS signal from the phone before it lost connection. He's 2 blocks from the station." Ryu looked at her without looking away. "He brought 2 men with him." Anita was on her feet. "I'll go out the back. I can make it to the main road and—" "Sit down, Anita. You don't understand what he's capable of when he's—" "Sit down." A command, something different from a command. The voice of a man who needed her to understand, without alarming her further that she did not need to run anymore tonight. She sat. He pulled out the chair directly across from her and sat too, forearms flat on the table, leaning forward just enough that she could see the deliberate steadiness of his breathing. "I need you to trust me for 20 minutes, he said. "Just 20 minutes. Can you do that?" Her hands were shaking. She pressed them palm down on the table surface and held them there by force of will. "What are you going to do to him?" Ryu looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to have a conversation with your husband," he said. "The kind of conversation that men like him only ever need to have once." 20 minutes felt like 20 years. Mrs. O sat across from her and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. Anita stared at the grain of the wood tabletop and breathed the way she had learned to breathe in the bad years, slowly, from the bottom of her lungs, one breath purchasing the next. She could hear movement from somewhere below. She couldn't tell if it was real or her own mind filling the silence with the thing she was most afraid of. Then footsteps on the stairs. Ryu came through the door alone. His shirt was still clean. His face was composed. There was nothing visibly different about him, except something deep in his eyes darker, and yet somehow more settled, like a decision that had been made and completed and filed away. He sat back down across from her. "Your husband has agreed to sign the divorce papers," he said. "Your passport will not be flagged. The Incheon terminal will be clear by morning." He paused briefly. "He also returned 3 items he had apparently removed from your belongings before you left the apartment." "Mrs. O has them for you." Anita stared at him. "What did you say to him?" "I told him who I was." A small pause. He already knew, she understood then. She understood why a Korean man at one of Emeka's dinners had gone white at the name Chinjian near an open window. Emeka hadn't just heard the name. He had spent years carefully navigating around it, which meant he understood exactly what territory he had wandered into tonight by following her to this building. "Is he?" "He's unharmed," Ryu said. He left on his own feet, He held her gaze without blinking. I told you, I don't keep people against their will. That applies to everyone. Something unlocked in Anita's chest. Something she had been holding closed for so long she had forgotten it was a door at all. Her exhale was long and quiet and uneven, and she did not try to control it. I don't understand why you did this, she said. Her voice was very quiet. You don't know me. I sat next to you on a train for 20 minutes and told you my problems like I had no sense left. Ryu was silent for a moment. When he spoke, the careful, factual quality of his voice had shifted slightly into something more deliberate, something that cost him more to say. My mother was a woman who needed someone to make one phone call, he said, and nobody made it. He held her gaze steadily. I have spent a significant part of my life making sure that particular failure does not happen again in my presence. Anita felt her eyes burn. She would not cry. She had made herself that promise on Tuesday night and she intended to keep it. But the burn moved through her anyway, and she let it because it was not grief this time. It was something older and more persistent being released without ceremony. Something that had been waiting a very long time for a room quiet enough to leave. I can still make Inchin, she said. The 6:15? Yes. He checked the slim watch on his wrist. You have 4 hours. You should try to sleep. Won't sleep, he agreed quietly. Probably not. He stood, moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the city entirely, quietly his spread below them in layered light. Seoul at 2 a.m., all distance and illumination, all the things occurring in the dark that the daytime would never account for. When you get to London, he said to the glass, send word through Mrs. O that you arrived safely. Didn't answer immediately. A long pause, the kind that belongs to people who choose their words with real care. When he turned, there was something in his face that was not the calculated stillness of the train or the precision of the last 2 hours. Something quieter. Something that had no name in the language of the life he had chosen and built and lived inside of completely. Because I would like to know, he said simply. She looked at him, this man who moved through Seoul like a city existing inside the city, who had dropped her phone through a gap in a train door without hesitation, who had sat across from her at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. and spoken about his mother in a voice that held, for just one sentence, everything he usually kept sealed behind the composure. Seok, she said. He waited. Thank you. He nodded once, crossed to the door. Paused with his hand on the frame, his back to her, the city still burning quietly beyond the window behind him. World is full of men who believe that the thing they love belongs to them, he said. You were never his. You were always only your own. He left. Anita sat at the kitchen table in the warm, still safe house, her jaw bandaged, her hands finally quiet, listening to Seoul breathe 4 hours before her flight. The silence around her was not the silence of held breath and careful footsteps and waiting for the next thing to go wrong. It was simply quiet. And quiet, she was beginning to remember, was something she was allowed to have. She pressed one hand flat on the table. Then she straightened her back. Then she looked toward the window, toward the morning still gathering somewhere out beyond the dark, and she let herself believe, for the first time in 4 years, that she was going to be all right. Not because someone had saved her, because she had saved herself. And tonight, for once, the world had not punished her for it. If this story held you from that first second on the train all the way to this moment, then you already know what kind of storytelling we bring here every single week. Hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new release. And drop a comment below. We want to know. Did you trust Ryu Seok from the moment he slid those tissues across the seat, or did he have to earn it? Tell us honestly. We read every single comment. See you in the next story.